All right. Hello. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Well, this is exciting. Usually, I have the kind of WeDeepen support team doing my bidding in every single way, and they've set me free. So I'm kind of running the show tonight. I am your facilitator, host, presenter, guide, blabbermouth, however you'd like to think of me for the next 90 minutes or so. We have a tight little cozy group, but a cool group of people here. I'm very grateful for you guys for showing up. I continue to be grateful to Deepen, to the WeDeepen folks for hosting this little program. You guys are awesome. Thank you for your help. And so I guess I'm, along those lines, I'll just introduce myself to those of you who don't know me. I am Dan Mackenzie. In my other life, I am basically a songwriter and music producer, but I've also spent quite a bit of time very deeply involved in spiritual self-development, self-transformational work over the last 30 years, really. And over the last 7 years or so, I've done a bit of writing, presenting, personal counseling in this space, and even more recently, some podcasting, and now this Omega Male. So let's see, how can I sort of give a little more background? My work is rooted in anthroposophy. I wish I had the time to explain what that is. It's worth a Google. I'll just say this, anthroposophy is the movement that the Waldorf education system was born from, and also biodynamic agriculture. I guarantee you'll have an interesting time investigating that a little bit. I've also worked quite deeply with nonviolent communication. I've been an avid yogi for 30 years or so. So that's kind of my foundation. As far as this program is concerned, this actually sprang from a book project that I've been working on by the same name, Omega Male. And in essence, that is my desire to contribute to the contemporary dialogue of the men's movement. And in a nutshell, I guess the focus is visualizing the ultimate, most healthy evolution for men, kind of like in an idealized way. What is the healthiest, most balanced way that we can ideally evolve as men? What's the future picture we're striving towards? And so that's been kind of my focus, both in the book and in this. And I thought it would be a great opportunity in working on this project to have this kind of informal online kind of forum where I can sort of road test some of the ideas for the book and sort of see how they land, learn how to talk about them, and engage people in conversations about these stuff, conversations that I think are meaningful and maybe even important in some ways, at least plant the seeds for those things. So the format kind of is, I will pick a topic and share some thoughts about it, kind of paint a picture. And then I will introduce and invite my featured guest to speak, whom I'm really excited about tonight. We have another lovely guest. And then she and I will talk a bit, and then we'll kind of open up the conversation to kind of a more of a town hall-y type thing. And so that's basically it. We do have our WeDeepen Omega Male guidelines for this. I'm just going to share our little guideline thingy. Oh yeah, it's my first successful screen share. So this basically just means when the conversation opens up, just try to be mindful of not interrupting people, not talking too long, just not being, too aggressively attacking anybody. It's a total space where we can all disagree and even do so passionately, but as long as we create a space that's kind and respectful, then I think people will feel comfortable sharing, which is what the last point, be bold, is about. So that's basically it. Before I introduce the actual topic tonight, I'm going to make one disclaimer, and that's this. I'm going to be speaking about our topic, and I'm going to be making some very broad generalizations. I'm going to be speaking ostensibly about the sort of traditional male-female dynamic in heteronormative relationships, but I honestly think that the conversation should and could include all relationships of any couples, gay, straight, lesbian, trans, I would even argue that in most relationships, if I've known them, there's kind of a female role being occupied in a kind of a male role. And I know it's probably just a Pandora's box to even just make that statement broadly, but I think it's defensible. And even in traditional hetero relationships, sometimes those roles are reversed, or sometimes they're reversed. They ping back and forth. But for the sake of what I'm trying to do here is not present a comprehensive, this is the whole deal about this situation, but rather think of me as I'm writing a story, or I'm painting a picture, I'm writing a song for you about this that presents kind of one way to look at this. And so I'm using those broad strokes, and that's it. So roll with me on that one. I think it'll just be easier to talk about this stuff. So drum roll, the topic is angry woman, clueless man. Thank you for I saw that visual drum roll. That was great. Angry woman, clueless man. And I brought some cool visuals just to kind of, if I can find them. Oops, it says Google Chrome error Zoom. This doesn't bode well. This could be, I think we might be about to encounter a serious Mercury retrograde moment here. So I'm going to try to, while I talk about this, get this up on screen. I guess I might as well have called this, oh, here we go. I think this is going to work right now. I could have called this raging woman, stupid man, or annoyed woman, selfish man, maybe. There's a lot of possible monikers here. Irritated woman, doofy man. Let's try this again now. I'm now going to do, here we go. Here's some images that may be familiar to kind of illustrate this. Oh, there we go. I'm trying to scroll through them, but I think it's just doing it automatically. These are pretty familiar, right? From different periods of time. So again, these are all just kind of variations on the same theme, right? So I just went with angry woman, clueless man. It seemed to be the most general. I always thought that was just basically some writing cliche that just kept getting recycled because it made for, easy entertainment and laughs. But the more I've gotten into relationship counseling and just talking to my friends and people I know about their relationships, I've realized that for a lot of people, this phenomenon is a lot more like reality TV than it is like some hackneyed sitcom situation. And sadly, it's not that funny when it's your real life situation. And so I kind of want to dig into how a sort of general phenomenon like this can happen. And so my starting point with this is a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I'm sure you guys have all heard of this, or some of you might have read it. It was a huge, huge hit in the 90s, a big new age smashing hit bestseller by John Gray. In fact, I think we've had John Gray on one of the WeDeepen programs, right? And it's a wonderful book, and it made a heavy impact upon me at the time. And I still think it's, and it obviously, I think improved a lot of people's lives, which is why it was so popular. And I still think it's an amazing book decades later. There's one respect only in which my kind of work and philosophy about this has diverged a little bit. And so I want to shed some light on that. And that is this kind of the core thesis of this extreme polarization, right? I mean, even the titles like men are from a different planet than women are. And I should say the book makes a really, really strong and compelling case for these supposedly inherent differences between men and women. It describes them very well, and it actually, I think, gives a little bit of a prescriptive notion about if we just understand how the other person is, then we know how to treat them in a different way. And I think I certainly benefited from that book in many ways. But I actually, I think that we're in a time now, and it might just be how things have shifted because evolution is happening so quickly now. We're in a time where maybe approaching it with a slightly different metaphorical bent might lead to even a deeper level of growth and personal evolution. And I'd put it this way, because the polarized way of looking at things, at least especially in the last 10 years, we've seen how that has led not really to increased harmony, the sort of sense of othering people. I think of like, what if someone now were to write a book like, Black people are from Mars and white people are from Venus, or, liberals are like this and conservatives are like this. There's a lot of that thinking already in our space. And I think as we even begin to try to reunite as a country, finding the overlap, finding what's in common, men and women are over 98% identical in their DNA. So I want to, and I'm going to unpack that a little bit more. I'm not just sort of being semantic about it. The picture I've always really liked better is how women are associated with the moon, right? Women are lunar and men are solar. Like there's this sort of daytime, nighttime thing. That way, at least we're allowed to be on the same planet still. So my sort of poetic vision of it is that we're all in the same sailboat, sailing across the earth together, but we have different navigational systems that we've either inherited or biologically been informed by, or maybe been socialized to have. And so the women, being lunar, have this, metaphorically speaking, intuitive ability to navigate by the stars and to feel the wind in their sails and to be able to make micro adjustments based on this highly sensitized feeling capability. And the men, we're like these broad daylight guys, right? We, again, generalizations here, but we like to know exactly what the destination is. And, we like to chart the best route to get there. And we like to use a map very clearly. We want to know where we're going on the map. We like to use, gear and gizmos to like help us get there. And, all the other stuff is a little woo woo. It's like, I'd rather rely on my, gauges. And even better if I can point the boat at something, and just go that way. And if I fall off course, I'll just pull the rudder to the appropriate place. And so we have these different systems, and how we acquired them. I mean, I think we can, if people are interested in talking about that, we can unpack that a little bit more. I think, times are changing, but what we've inherited, at least in our acculturation, if that's a word, the boys get erector sets when they're children, and girls get dolls to play with, and boys are told that they can't cry, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of programming that happens. Maybe some of it's biological, I'm not sure. But the other part of the Mars-Venus thing that I suspect might be expanded is this notion that these differences are fixed forever. I actually believe that it's observable that the differences between men and women, even in their sort of navigational systems and predispositions, are beginning to get a little blurrier, and will continue to do so. And so in order to kind of, we have the option of accommodating and being consciously part of that evolution, rather than just accepting, hey, this is the way dudes are, that's the way girls are, I'm going to read the script and say the right thing. So that's kind of where I'm coming from here. And so what happens, I think, in relationships, speaking to our theme more directly, in sort of Western romantic love, we fall in love with each other, and sometimes it's the things that define our differences that are attractive to us. So men are attracted to this mysterious feeling, intuitive being that's a little bit different from me, but I'm intrigued. And women in some ways are attracted to this like achievement-oriented, ordered, competent guy. And when we're falling in love, there's this massive amount of what do they call it? Confirmation bias, right? So when you're in that honeymoon phase, like any information coming in gets fed in to support the narrative of this is the most amazing person on the planet, and they're meant for me, and I'm in love. And of course, that begins to fade over time. It's one of the greatest feelings on earth, as anyone who's ever been in love can attest. But it's not really something that can be sustained, right? And so in any healthy relationship, as our flaws begin to emerge, it's natural to kind of like have a more sober picture of the other person. And I think as long as we can hold on to the core of the love, everything can be worked through, and we learn to accommodate each other and learn from each other. However, I think what happens a lot, because we have this extreme notion of romanticism, and we get married and I found the one. For some people, that polarity can kind of bite us, because if we don't have really healthy ways of learning to communicate with each other, learning to grow with each other, then the narrative can get flipped. And so as my partner's flaws emerge, I start telling a new story, like, I don't know who this person is. This isn't the person I fell in love with. This isn't the person I married. this person's jerk, you know, and so the kind of reverse in this picture I'm painting of what's happened here culturally, the reverse of the competent thinking being that is the man, the tarnished picture of that is the incompetent idiot. So that's, you know, that's where we come to Homer Simpson and all the Al Bundy and all these guys. And the tarnished picture of the intuitive, sensitive, feeling being that is the woman is this being whose feelings are out of control and who only has negative feelings. They're being projected at me. And so the new narrative for the woman is, and I've heard so many different versions of this, it's got to be a real thing. This guy must be malfunctioning. He's like, even the simplest things that any sane person would know to do or to take care of, things that are so obvious, I shouldn't have to explain them to him, he's failing at. So what's wrong with this guy? And the man's toxic, I don't want to use that word, tarnished picture of the woman is, I don't know who this sentient feeling being that I fell in love with is, but the only feeling she seems to have is anger, and it's directed at me. And she doesn't acknowledge any of the things. I do this and I do this for her. You know, I've got my ordered look at what I do and how I contribute. She doesn't see anything. All she does is find faults with me. And so, you know, he's saying, if she would just get off my back, everything would be great. And she's like, I would get off your back, but first I have to help you pull your head out of your ass. And so that's the picture that these sitcoms and cartoons paint, but in reality, it's a little bit uglier. And the real problem, as I see it, is that over time, if that narrative becomes more and more deeply entrenched, then the whole relationship is coded in a kind of in resentment. And I read at some point a study that people can have all kinds of feelings toward their partners, but contempt is something that a relationship can't survive. And so I think when there's enough of this resentment from the negative narratives that get built up, contempt sets in, and then a relationship is doomed. So the question is kind of like, how can we avoid that? And what am I really presenting here that's different or an expansion upon Men Are From Mars? Because I think Mars and Venus gives us a really great starting point. I think part of the popularity of this book is it really does work to have the operation manual of the other, you know, and to learn the script. And so I imagine, you know, like for all the men who figured out, because the book, you know, I don't want to try to break down the whole book, but it's a lot about how, you know, men and women process stress differently. And so men retreat into their caves and women want to talk. And yet when women are talking, they want you to listen and be present and support and not fix their problems for them. There's sort of like a lot of this sort of operation manual stuff. And so for every man who learned, she seems stressed out, I'm going to just be here and listen and take it in and bite my tongue when I feel the inclination to fix her problems for her. I imagine so many relationships were saved by that, or by the woman who learned, he's retreating into his cave, I'm just going to give him a little space for now, not insist that we talk about this now, or even though I think that there's something really obvious like that he should do for my birthday, I'm going to spell it out for him a little bit on the map. Right. So I think that is really powerful. I'm not diminishing that approach or that book in any way. But I guess if I'm going to kind of plant my philosophical flag anywhere, to use a intentionally masculine metaphor, it's this. I think that rather than that we can go past that stage and in our recognition that which seems other in the opposite gender lives within me. In other words, every man has the lunar navigational system within him, and every woman has the solar navigational system, whether it's a backup system or it's just dormant, it hasn't been awakened. And if we can do a kind of inner work and couples work, and even work within our friends and do things that awaken and give us the opportunity to practice those systems, then we get to a different level of connecting and growth. If I, as a man, learn to let go of the map and stop trying to use the gear and just, you know, try to navigate at night by the stars and feel what it's like to feel the wind in the sails and feel the wind of my partner and what I'm, you know, and can be responsive to, then I can get out of my competitive, ordered mindset into a more supportive, lunar, communal mindset. And the same holds true for women. And I'm not suggesting, I've described women as, having the lunar navigation system is feeling based and the solar navigation system is thinking based. It's not to suggest that women don't know how to think and men don't know how to feel. It's just, the inherited systems that we're plugged into. So if men can infuse their thinking logic stuff with more intuitive feeling and the vice versa. And I'd actually, and I'm about to wrap it up and then maybe introduce our guests, but I'd go so far as to say that women are ahead of the game here. Women, out of necessity, have had to develop the solar navigation system within themselves to awaken it. And simply because of, I don't know how far back in history you want to go. And we talked a little bit about this in the last installment about patriarchy and things like that. But certainly, undeniably, women have had kind of the short end of the stick in many ways societally. And so women, in order to fight for the right to vote, for the right to become landowners, for the right to have equality in different realms, for the right to work alongside men and do men's jobs, so supposedly men's jobs in systems and organizations and companies that were created by and for men, they have had to develop these capacities out of necessity. And men have not been in a pressured situation to have to do that culturally, except we're now seeing over time this very slow rollout of a kind of a sociological crisis. Men are in crisis because the world is evolving, women have evolved to occupy new roles, and humanity is evolving. And this old antiquated archetype of the purely masculine man who is stoic and competitive and achievement oriented and has no emotional vocabulary, it's not working. And so for those men who are whose upbringings have been more conservative or whose social milieu is more conservative in that way, it's been a real crisis, but in a way for all men. So that's kind of the picture I want to paint, and we can sort of elaborate on more stuff. And I have a few more verses to this song, but I think this is a good opportunity to kind of turn it over to our featured guest tonight, who I'm excited to introduce. I'm just going to read her introduction so I don't blow it. But her name is Kiné Corder. She is the CEO of Presidential Lifestyle, and she is the world's #1 financial hypnotherapist. She helps men navigate. She helps men navigate, I like that, through an existential midlife crisis, and helps healthcare entrepreneurs who want to clarify their money mission, learn to grow, protect, gift, and enjoy their money while making a difference. And so in working with men through their midlife crises, she's actually done a lot of couples work. And I'm curious to introduce Kiné and see what she has to add into this mix.
Oh, hello.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Yeah.
I'm excited. So I was taking notes as you were talking, partly because I want us to stay on the same page and I can go and go and go. But also because there are going to be some places where we probably agree and some places where we disagree. And I like to disagree because I think, like you said in the beginning, there is this song that you are creating, and it has, verse 1, verse 2, and maybe I bring in the bridge, and the bridge is slightly different than, right? So that's where I want to go. I want to bring in the bridge because I do want us to keep on the idea of evolution and evolving, kind of like the omega male, but also understand that we can stay the same in some ways and embrace that. So what do I mean by that? You and I have talked about before the masculine and the feminine, and how men don't want to even talk about the feminine. It's like, what feminine? Me? No, me no feminine, right? So they'll like revert back to caveman if there's talk about femininity. And I think we have, in America at least, equated feeling with feminine, as you talked about earlier. And if you do that, then that means that men only get to feel a few things that society allows him to feel. And usually that's anger. Number one, when I see a patient, and this is whether this is a teenage boy or an adult male, anger is the one emotion that they feel comfortable sharing because that's what society told them. You mentioned this earlier. You can't cry. You like get out there and, you know, fight it out. I would say two other ones that we sometimes allow men to feel, especially when they're young, when they're little boys. It's okay if they're lustful. Oh, he's going to be a ladies' man, is what they say, right? And then he grows up to be a ladies' man, and we ridicule him for that. That's not fair. And then what happens? So then he gets maybe a little older and we ask him, what does he want to be when he grows up? What kind of question is that to ask a 10-year-old? He doesn't know. He has no idea of all the possibilities, but he'll come up with something and he'll start to answer that question. And then he's going to be rich and he's going to buy his mom a house, right? Because now he could be greedy. That's the other emotion he's allowed to feel. So anger, greed, and lust. And this is what people are describing as this toxic male. But we programmed him to be this way. And when he became this way, then we got angry with him. And that is that angry woman that you described, because she wants him now to feel and tell me how you feel, but he's not equipped with that because he wasn't taught that. And if you want him to feel, then there's going to be some patience. And we're going to have to take that wall down brick by brick. If you want him to feel, you're not bulldozing in there, changing him. And what if evolution is not necessarily change? What if evolution is rising rather than changing? And he can rise to the occasion, but he has to be given some steps. And men love steps. This is why I love to work with them, because they love steps. If you pointed out step 1, step 2, step 3, they will go through those steps. No problem. All right. Okay, doc. And I'm not even a doctor, but as a therapist, that's what they like to call me. So it's like, okay, doc, what's the next step? And they'll go through the steps. But what we don't allow for, and what men are not quite taught, is that what you said women can do. And it's just that esoteric, feel your way through. And women do that really well. Go off the intuition. Oh, my intuition tells me that woman intuition. And what I find is that men and women are not similar. Yes, in our makeup, like you said, 98% biologically, but we are mostly compatible. We're not necessarily similar. Now, I say that women are survivors and men are thrivers. And strivers. And then if you put them together, then they could both be thrivers. So I said, women are survivors, men are strivers. And if you put them together, then they can be thrivers. What I mean by that is women's job is to survive, stay alive. And they know how to do it, and they know how to do it well. And if you let them, and this is the reason why they might be critical of men, because in order to survive, you have to see the bad. You have to see what's bad out there. You can't go around seeing butterflies and rainbows and unicorns. Otherwise, you'll die. So as a survivor, she has to see the bad. And so she's pointing out all the flaws. Now, she doesn't realize she's not primitive woman anymore, and she doesn't have to do that. And the survivor in her just can't go to sleep long enough to enjoy life and enjoy this man. And this man, as the striver, his job is to take care of the family. So as the striver is built to be a little self-centered, because how is he going to take care and provide if he's not there, if he isn't nurtured and fulfilled? So he has to fulfill himself first, kind of like they say on the airplane, put on your mask first before assisting others. That statement sounds a little self-centered, a little selfish, but that's what he has to do, and that's what he's built to do. So in order to take care of his family, he's going to put himself first. Now that sounds a little selfish, but that's the primitive brain working. And the primitive brain says stuff, prepare and keep yourself alive so that you can provide for these other people. I explain that a lot because I think we look at the role of the woman. And when I say the role of the women, I am talking kind of traditional, but I know it's evolved a lot and we can talk about that too. But if we look at the role of the woman in that heterosexual relationship, and we look at the role of the man in a heterosexual relationship, a lot of times they have two different jobs. Now they can switch roles if they agree, but they do both have to agree on this. So they can switch roles. I have a really good friend, runs a successful company, $100,000 a year business, and her husband stays home with their daughter. That is what he does. That is the role that they agreed on. She's out in the public. He doesn't not have an ounce of public in him. He doesn't care about any of that, but they've agreed on this relationship and it works. And it's beautiful. And he supports her as she comes home, and she supports him in the things that he needs from her. Now, when you can agree on that, that works fine. But it's when the roles reverse and you haven't agreed on that. But when does that happen? It happens when one or the other pushes the other one into the role. So if the man says, I'm not going to work, you're going to go to work and take care of me. But the woman is like, I didn't subscribe to that. And then, but she has to, because she doesn't see any other way to survive, which is her nature, then she'll get pushed into that rescue striver mode, and he'll go into that survivor mode. And when that is forced, then you have divisiveness, dissension, and contempt, which you talked about before. And then the relationship is doomed from there, because then you start to judge each other. And when you go into judgment, you can really forget it, because it's not about having the right partner. It's about being the right partner. But our focus often is around the other person. Now, if we could just turn that in, and I think you mentioned this before, it's like really looking inside ourselves and saying, okay, what do I bring to this relationship? Who am I as a woman, as a man? And who do I want to be? And the question I like to ask, specifically men, but I ask this of the couple, is how do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to show up? And then another way that I ask that, because sometimes that question is kind of woo-woo, is how do I want to be described when I leave the room? Oh, and someone sees me with my husband, someone sees me with my wife, and I'm talking about the real you, not the Instagram you. What are they going to say about it? Oh, he's a loving husband. Oh, he's a nurturing father. Oh, he's hardworking. Whatever the words are you want, you got to be really clear on those words. And I say pick 3 or 4 and get clear on what those characteristics are. And then watch and see and notice, are you showing up like that? You said you want to be kind and loving. Is that the way you talk to your wife? Is that the way you talk to your husband? Are you kind? Are you loving? Because it didn't sound that way. And so those are the things that the first question that I like to put out there is just, how do you want to show up in the world? And that's the question I ask, the audience and every person I work with is, how do you want to show up in the world?
That makes a lot of sense to me. If there's a place where we disagree, I haven't seen it yet, because everything you said really resonated with me. I mean, the things that I'd like to dig into, what really particularly struck me in that passage of very many insightful things was how you talked about the role reversal works when it's agreed upon by both, and what happens when it's not. I do myself know various couples where either for a period of time or for the entire, I have one couple that I know where the woman has a more traditional sort of like 9-to-5 job, makes really most of the money, and the husband is actually a caretaker of children, and when he does work, and that's a very, and he does a lot of the cooking, the stuff that the women used to do. So and it's a beautiful, totally functioning relationship. And if you were out to dinner with this couple, I don't think you'd notice some dynamic where she was particularly dominant and masculine and he was the housewife. So I think that people can embody these different roles in a really huge variety of ways. And I do think, if there's anything I want to explore is how definite it is. Again, in a lot of what you said is I think supportive of not just the men from Mars, women from Venus thing, but kind of what I'm saying too. When you say about the striving and the surviving, only I would say that the way I see this is that we are, the linear part of our evolution is time. And I loved also what you said about rising versus evolving, right? So there is such a thing, unless we're getting super esoteric, as the past and the future, right? And there is kind of an observable trajectory of how we, as you know, and there's within humanity, of course, there's different cultures, and different cultures evolve in different ways and different rates, but there's kind of a movement. And my feeling is that the movement, not just my feeling, my observation is that the movement, we're seeing this in very many ways, is actually leading towards an increased diversity. It's not like it's moving towards a new type of woman and a new type of man, but there, if you just see in the kind of host of nuanced gender expressions and sexual preference identifications, there's like, we're kind of having, and I don't think it's just a phase. I don't suspect that 10 years or 100 years from now, the world is going to look like it did in the 50s. I think we're becoming more culturally intermingled. We're becoming more racially intermingled. We're becoming more nationalistically intermingled. And then there's a lot of things at play here. But so that, I think in that diversification, there is a little bit of the blurring. And so there are, thankfully, there are women, I think, and women who are daughters of daughters of daughters of those suffragettes who are going to become strivers, because that's what their new programming is saying to them. And there are men that are going to be survivors for their own reasons, you know, and sometimes it's unhealthy reasons, like they're surviving the alcoholism of their parents or whatever. So maybe there's a little bit of tension in what we're presenting there, but I suspect not too much. What you did say, again, returning to the
Before
piece
you go,
about—
I would just like to add something right there.
Sure.
What we have to be conscious of is it is okay for us to evolve and go into these different roles and have some diversity. But what we want to be careful, what my concern would be, is that we create divisiveness. And that's what I hear a lot of right now, especially when I did work with couples, I specifically work with men. And usually when I do work with men, it's because the wife is like, you need to go see Kiné or I'm going to file for divorce. So it's like that dire straits, and they are divided in this part at this point.
Right.
And I think that if we can embrace our differences, but also embrace as we evolve, oh, he's shifting, he's changing, but incrementally, you know, or see the progress. We're looking for perfection. If we say, I asked you to do this and you didn't do this in my time, then it's over. It's like all bets are off and you get no gold star. You don't get progress star. That's not a star. It doesn't exist. So if we could see that progress, because evolution didn't go, if you look at that picture, it didn't go from, arms on the ground to upright. There was this evolution, but we've got to make way, even in the small incremental, the ones you have to look micro evolutions to really see. And there's a lot of love that has to go there, a lot of patience that has to be there in order to see that. And the only way you can do that is to be introspective, to see your own progress, because you're not perfect either. But society tells women, all the shows that you just talked about, they say that this was right. This woman is right. This man is clueless. Look at him. He's horrible. He's awful, right? Woman is right. Man is wrong. That's another book. I don't know if it's made yet, but they should write it, because that's what society is saying. Woman is right, man is wrong. And so because of that, woman doesn't know she also has some growing to do and some evolving to do. So she goes, wait, society told me that I'm okay. I've watched enough TV shows to know I'm okay. It's him that's the problem. He's messing up this relationship. And the man is like, oh, well, it's my fault. When they come to therapy, it's like, I messed up this relationship. I got to do better. Where you messed up is that you didn't say, well, honey, here are some expectations I had of you too. I just never told you. I just thought them all. And then I was like, she's never going to do them. So I just gave up. So and a man is more likely to just say, oh, forget it. And a woman is not doing that. She's like, no, you will change. And I will change you. She gets really adamant about it. And so because she is so adamant, it must happen, because this is part of her survival. And men will not fight if they won't win. They have to know they'll win or they won't fight. It's like, no, I'm not fighting for that. That's not worth it. They'll go on and do something that they can win at, because they love to win.
Now,
So I bring that up to say we've got to be able to not be divided, but to collaborate in this evolution and allow for it to happen and celebrate it, even the small incremental parts.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think again, we're on the same page there. And I think it happens, as many individuals as there as so many cultural backgrounds are there, so different, like it's going to happen different for somebody who's raised in San Francisco than it is someone who's raised in Atlanta or in Dallas, and it's going to happen different for someone who's raised in France in a conservative family or a religious family or a Muslim family or Christian family or an atheist family. It is a big hodgepodge.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is it's like the leaves on the tree, are a little, they're blowing at their own little, so as individuals, in a way, we have the opportunity to do two things, I would say, just to home in on it. One, to do conscious inner work and, conscious relationship work, conscious inner work and conscious relationship work. So we're evolving whether we like it or not. We have all these cultural influences. We have all this programming that goes into influencing our opinions and who we are. And then we have, and I'm about to, I think, open up the conversation to see if anyone else pipes in, but we have the opportunity as individuals, even though the cultural change might be happening very, very, very slowly. I sometimes wonder, like, here it is, I was born in 1967, and women just got the right to vote like less than 100, like just 100 years ago. Now, why did that change happen so slowly? But as individuals, we have the opportunity to step out of that evolution a little bit. And I think the way it happens is by consciously endeavoring. And like you said, you've probably encountered a lot of men that aren't willing to fight for their relationships, but I do think some men are. And
they are, that's why they come to me. Otherwise, they wouldn't be fighting. They're not willing to fight fights that they can't win.
Right. So the other thing, responding to what you said, which resonated with me too, is that there is, beyond all of this how-to stuff, and going from the manner from like learning the blueprint to awakening certain capacities, the kind of stuff I'm talking about, and that we're talking about culturally encouraging, even in our children. There's also something that's a little bit more mercurial, and I think you spoke to it, so I want to expand upon it, which is the gesture in relationship of love. The gesture of love being, I am willing to consciously choose to see this person that I'm in relationship with, no matter how bad the conflict has gotten, because I want to make it work and I want to save the relationship. I'm willing to choose to make a practice even of looking at them and seeing them in their idealized form, to somehow bring myself back to that person that I fell in love with. There must be something. There's a kernel of golden truth in that feeling that we have when we originally are drawn to each other, And I think it actually takes a reawakening of that, regardless of all the male-female stuff, to look at someone and say, I love you. I want to be your companion. I want to do whatever it takes. And that is my gesture of love. And I think that if that falls into place, then everything else can grow from that. And if that gesture is not there, that willingness to step out of your ego enough to really just tap into this love that once flowed through you and is still there in some way, then anything is possible. Does that resonate with you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So my Valentine's episode of my podcast, I have a podcast called the Money and Meaning Podcast. Talk a lot about money because money is the number one cause of stress, also the number one cause of divorce. So I talk a lot about money, but in this episode, I'm mostly talking about love. And I talk about love in this sense that we have this romanticized idea of what love looked like. And it always has to look like you doing something for me. That's what love looks like, right? You making me smile. You making me laugh. You taking me on a date. We're getting dressed up. This is love. So not. This is love 10% of the time. And maybe it's less than that sometimes if there's kids and jobs and businesses and all the things. So I think the first is that, and I think you kind of mentioned this or alluded to this, is that definition of love. What does it look like? What if I'm in love with you? That's one thing, but I also need to be in like with you. That's another thing. Yeah, I gotta like those things that you do when you wake up in the morning, when you throw your socks on the floor. I just gotta, oh, that man, oh, that woman, she never puts that thing away, or she always leaves this on. You just, don't let that be the thing that gets on your nerves so much that you forget to love. It's like, it's a pair of socks. It's a switch. Turn it off. It's not that hard.
Right.
Yeah. And
Right. It's
so we
little,
believe,
little right standing in for a bigger problem, right? When it's
yeah,
like shock represents all this other anger that I've not processed against you.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a real thing. I want to kind of just say, to consciously invite anyone who at this point, let's sort of consider this more of an open dialogue. I mean, you and I will keep leading it, particularly, depending on how people pipe in. But if anyone, wants to chime in, just unmute yourself and kind of say something, or if you have something to share and you're not sure where to interject, you can drop it into the chat and I'll invite you to speak. But has anything been brought up or alluded to here that inspires anyone to kind of contribute or tell their story or, share an opinion on? I'm just opening the space right now for that before you and I because you and I could probably gab for the next 45 minutes and just fill it.
This is true.
I'll say
So I'm not
something.
saying okay, you're good.
Hi, I'm Dawn. How are you?
Hey, Don.
So I hope that someday soon, we won't even have to talk about masculinity and femininity, just like we won't have to have conversations about race, just like we won't have to have these things that divide us and separate us, like you were talking about, Kiné, because I believe that the only reason why we categorize masculine and feminine is because we don't have the language not to, so it's like we compartmentalize them because there has been such a disparity between how more quote unquote masculine qualities have been valued in society, and more feminine qualities have been considered less than, or not as worthy or of respect, love, honor, and respect. And so I think a lot of issues come out because there's this sense of competition in a way that well, I have qualities that are more valuable than your qualities. It's like, no, wait a second, we just bring different gifts to the table. If we can come to this place of honoring our differences rather than making them the source of contention. It's like you bring certain gifts to the table that I don't have, and I bring certain gifts to the table that you don't have. And together, when we work in synergy and we collaborate and we try to create something that's bigger than either one of us could contribute together. I mean, could contribute on our own. I mean, this is the thing that I think that both people need to bring to the partnership. Having this sense of, I value what you bring to the table versus, why aren't you picking up your sock? In other words. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that I think a lot of times things don't work out. I mean, in my case, 27 years of marriage, and I got divorced, and I was a licensed professional counselor who helped other couples. But even though we long periods of time, there was a sense of not taking responsibility for the ways that he was hurting our relationship, or he was showing up in not a loving way. So when you talk about love is not a feeling, love is not a feeling. Actually, love is a choice, and love is an energy. Love is a way of showing up in your relationship. Like, are you creating a sense of community and union and collaboration, or are you creating a sense of divisiveness and separation and competition? So you have to be super conscious about how you show up. Am I being the loving partner that I want to have?
Yeah. I love the masculine and feminine talk, and the way that I describe it is more like energy, kind of like what you were just saying last.
Yeah.
It's like the feminine energy is important, and we need both. We need masculine and feminine energy. And I see the masculine energy, like if you push out. The masculine energy just pushes out, right? It's that bold outward energy. And I work a lot with money, and money has a masculine energy to it. And that's why when women decide they want to become millionaires and billionaires and, start companies, they then have to take on this masculine, or have had to take on this masculine role, and they have to cut their hair and wear pantsuits. They can't wear the red lipstick and the skirt, and else they won't be respected, right? They can't bring their femininity to the boardroom. And lately that has been evolving and changing, and we're allowed to bring that feminine energy. And I see that feminine energy is drawn in, like the femininity draws in, the masculinity pushes out. And you need both. Sometimes you do need to push people back, like step back, right? And sometimes you need to draw people in. You want them on your side. You want them by your side, and you need that finesse. And both are important. Now, sometimes it might be 10% and 90%. Sometimes it might be 50-50, which is rare, or the other way, whatever the number is, there's a formula for you in every situation. And that is true in a relationship too, because sometimes a man needs a woman to be completely in her feminine, and he needs to just see her in her feminine and let her be that. And she needs to be there sometimes, and vice versa. She needs to look at him and see him completely in his masculine and no feminine. She's like, I don't need that right now. Right now, I need you to help us, provide, right? And so, and so it just depends on where we are in this relationship, and the relationship evolves, right? It's like if the person is evolving, then so is relationship. Let's let the relationship evolve. How beautiful is that, to not have the same relationship you had 20 years ago? That'd be awesome. So, but a lot of times we're like, no, we want it to stay exactly this way, and that doesn't work. It doesn't serve anybody. So I agree in the sense that we don't have to talk about it, because we're so flowing and freeing, and the energy just flows, and we know how to use it. It's okay.
So the underlying question here, and I really am glad you brought that up too, Dawn, because this is a question that I keep returning to a lot, and because I don't have a clear answer for it. And I think there might be, and maybe the answer is both. But you started by saying, presenting a vision of a future where we don't even talk about masculine and feminine. And then we sort of talked about that these differences existed. And then Kiné kind of went into another picture of how these things manifest in relationship and how we need the masculine and the feminine. So the question for me is the future kind of where you're envisioning it, namely where we acknowledge that these things are so universal to men and women and people of all gender identifications that there's no real use in identifying them as masculine and feminine, like sort of a little bit against the picture in a way that Kiné is offering, where she's saying, right, this is money has a masculine energy and this has a feminine energy. Or, I think that's one option. Or is it a world in which we become so comfortable with the understanding of femininity and masculinity, and we divorce those things from male and female, right? So that we can categorize these traits in ways that don't evaluate them in a hierarchical way. Yeah. So like you said, the feminine things are the weaker traits, and we kind of and men, we sort of need, I can see this sort of stage of men going, I have my sensitivity, because that's kind of where a lot of men are now. I got my feminine side.
I'm sick of all this talk about vulnerability.
Right. But in a way I want it, so that's still kind of a philosophical, what's the language around it going? And to me, there's a little bit of a deeper spiritual reality here that I want to kind of go out on a limb and throw that into the mix. And that is this. We have clearly biological differences in our male and female bodies, and different bodies that people are born with, right? Undeniably so. And some of those differences carry kind of imperatives that can influence our behavior the same way. And maybe those things are partly what inform the sociological differences that have been trained over time. But I would say this, my sense is that the human spirit itself doesn't have a gender the way the body does. Maybe I'd go so far as to get really esoteric and say maybe the incarnating soul has a gender mission, and maybe that accounts for some people feeling like they ended up in the wrong body. So I don't want to diminish that experience, but my understanding, you know, and of course there's no proving any definition of what the human spirit is. And I know certain people on this call probably would argue that there is such a thing as a human spirit. So again, I'm just asking you to roll with this esoterically a little bit. But my sense is that the human spirit is a kind of microcosm of the entire universe. And so we carry all of the polarities. And so what I was saying earlier in terms of tapping in, the men tapping into the female navigational system, this is all still jargon. What I'm really getting at is, and I think a lot of it comes relationally, and like I said, it starts at learning the script. If I do this, she'll be happier. And if I do this, he'll be happier, and will work better. And it goes then to a level of like, I'm actually learning that I benefit from being aware of my emotions and expressing them. And I start by practicing with my friends and talking about things that I otherwise felt too vulnerable to talk about. And now I'm learning to be vulnerable in relationship. And then it goes to a level of like, both the women and the men in the picture that Kiné offered, we also have to have not only the agreement of the roles shifting, but women need to accommodate men learning to speak their language. And if a man's going to be vulnerable, not suddenly not being attracted to him anymore because he's being emotionally self-expressive, or man feeling emasculated because the woman in the relationship had to step into the pushing energy that Kiné is talking about. But even on a deeper level, and this is sort of the essence of what I'm saying in this particular rant here, is in this deep spiritual meditative path, where we get to a level of inner tranquility and conscious exploration. And there's a thing that happens where we begin to a kind of higher I. I'm reminded of the rising up that Kiné said. A higher self emerges and awakens. And that self is able to look at the ego and all of the constructs attached to it and all the programming from an observatory kind of third person kind of way. And it's that experience, I think, that is more transformative than anything. And why I kind of always harp on deep meditative work is that if we're willing to go there, not only in relationship, not only in our intellectual learning, but in our own spiritual work, there's a kind of magical thing that happens where we start seeing, that we get a vantage point where we see the programming, and in seeing it and in seeing where it came from. Oh, I had a great conversation with Kiné where she's identified a point in her life where a certain trauma was initiated or a certain realization happened, right? Like we can actually have more of these realizations about how we became this way, and we heal those things, and they sort of fall away. And so that is a kind of a natural way that's far beyond the practical interactive stuff, where real inner work can lead to a kind of transformation in a sort of more spiritual, magical way. I don't know if that resonates. Usually when I start talking about the spiritual meditative work, there's like this crickets, but I have to bring it in because it's the essence of the work that I do. So again, is anyone else out there wanting to jump in on this now three-way conversation?
Yeah, and as
I feel like it's really the integration of one, just like day and night, you know, right. The yin and the yang. It's like bringing the polarities into union, into oneness. And so that we recognize the subtle differences, or even sometimes not so subtle differences, but instead of, you know, thinking that they're separate, we have to balance them within ourselves, and then we balance them within our partnerships, and our partner has to do the same, so that when we show up, however we show up, we're aware of the effect, you know, on ourselves and on the other person. And so it's just being mindful and being aware and having that higher mind consciousness of, you know, who was I created to be? I was created both, you know, both, if you want to say masculine and feminine, both aspects within me. And sometimes I have to show up in the more pushing, striving, and sometimes I have to show up more as the collaborative, you know, nurturing, and depending on whatever situation I'm in. And it's this ebb and flow within myself and then within my partnerships.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I almost feel inclined. There's a small enough group, and there's a few people I know in here that I'm almost wanting to put certain people on the spot because I'm dying to hear what they have to say. So I'm going to just start doing that, and feel free to say pass. But I'm kind of wondering what Seth Larson might have to contribute at this point, because this is a man I have great conversations with. He happens to be a friend of mine. Seth, something about this conversation must have evoked something in you. Is there anything, even going back to other parts, where you'd like to share some insight?
How does one become aware of one's own anger and or cluelessness in the relationship?
Yeah, that's a great question, because somebody pointing it out to you is not enough, right? And really where it comes is when the pain happens. It has to be enough pain that allows you to now, you now can no longer focus on all the other things. You now turn within, and its pain has to go away, because the brain's job is to keep you alive, and pain is the body's way of talking to you. The body shows you pain, and you're like, oh, it must be something I'm supposed to do. And so then you have to go within to see, oh, what is it that's happening? And we're all brilliantly made. And because you've been external and looking outside, you really haven't seen it. But just the mere fact that you feel all that pain and you don't have anywhere else to look now but internal, you will see it. And you slowly see it. It'll be a little, and then a little bit more, and a little bit more, and and that's why they call it aha moments, because finally it opens up and you're like, oh shoot, that's what I do. Like, I'm a really bold, I say what's on my mind. My first words growing up were, you're bothering me. Like a whole sentence, you're bothering me. That was my first words. I don't always know when I'm blunt. I don't always know, but then sometimes it'll come out my mouth and I'm like, that's what they mean. Because I'll see the look on somebody's face and I'm like, oh, those one of those bold moments. Probably should have softened that up a little bit. So I think that comes out in enough pain. And then next thing you know, you're like, I see myself.
So as someone who has experienced that, pain, to come to a realization about the type of relationship that I had created in the past, which was based on some of the beautiful things and some of the more challenging things that my parents' relationship was, which, by the way, are on this call right now. I think I came to some sort of recognition of how I could choose to be going forward. I guess my question is more, I feel like, Dan, what you're trying to do with the Omega Male is to reach people who potentially are looking for some different way of being. And so I guess my question is, how do you reach those who might be stuck in this paradigm of angry partner, clueless partner? So as someone who's been through it, what questions can you ask? How can you reach the people that you're looking to reach, Dan, and get them to recognize that they might be playing one of those roles?
Well, that's a good question. And it's kind of, the answer is doing this. I think one of the facile answer is that's part of what I'm trying to do. And it's an interesting and challenging process. When you initially asked the question, I was thinking of the answer. I was pondering in a realm, I should say, of how does this apply to an individual in a relationship? How do you know? How do you come to the realization that you're stuck in this thing? And the way I was going to yes and Kiné's response was, in addition to having enough pain to pull your hand out of the fire, I think that realization can also happen in the space of surrender. I think anyone who's been in a serious relationship, because if you're in that narrative with each other, there's often just a constant adversarial thing. And there's a feeling that we are no longer partners, we're actually against each other. It's not you and me together, it's you and me against each other. And it's unrelenting. And when there's finally a moment, and sometimes it actually comes through pain, it comes when an argument gets so ugly that it brings you to the brink, or one person to the brink, or one person gets so pronounced in their emotional expression, whether it's anger or sadness, sobbing or screaming. And it's not always that dramatic, but we all have experienced something where there's a kind of a breakthrough. And there's just a surrender. And it's like, I'm so tired of fighting you. And I'm so tired of this dynamic. And both people see an opportunity. And there's, in the feeling of surrender, that's usually when the space comes where we're willing to look honestly at ourselves. Because when I'm in this mode and you're in this mode, I'm just making a case against you like a lawyer or like a fighter, like a boxer. I'm looking for the weak spot to box at, or I'm looking for the weakness in your argument. And so I'm not looking at myself. I'm not taking in what you're saying, what you're expressing to me. But and this is, I think, part of the magic of the love gesture that I was suggesting. So it's in the space, not just of pain, but of love and true surrender to the other, that you're willing to kind of go, okay, now I can think about and feel about the things you were saying to me. And I'm willing to look at myself. I'm willing to be vulnerable now and look at what kind of asshole I've been. And like, maybe you were right, you know, and both people have this, like, and in a really good conversation, often the end of it is, it's not just like, oh, I'm sorry, and I'm sorry. There's like, in the magical moments happen when it's like, you know what, I really hear what you've said, and I recognize this in myself, and I want to change that. I'm going to work on that, you know? And so I think in terms of that kind of microcosmic answer, that's a big spot, surrender. But I think maybe there's something that can be extrapolated from that, that's in the bigger picture, to your answer, to your question, your extended question about how do I reach people with that understanding. You know, again, I always try to tailor who I'm talking to, you know, and some people respond to humor and some people respond to an anecdote that they can relate to. Is there a broader answer? I don't know. But for me, it's finding a sort of gentle way to challenge, you know, to have conversations like you and I've had, and like most of the people that I think are really interesting, curious people are willing to, like Kiné said in the beginning, like, it's good to have a little disagreement, you know, because if we're willing to be vulnerable and explore being challenged, but there's an openness required for that. So the openness, I think, is somehow related to the surrender that happens in a big way for the breakthrough. I don't know, does any of that make sense?
Yeah. I wanted to add something too. I think often when something is shown to you by somebody you respect, so maybe you don't look inside yourself, and maybe your significant other, you can't hear them anymore because they've argued about this one thing too many times, but somebody else you trust or respect shows you, hey, let me show you this omega male thing, then that might open your eyes and allow you to see something that you might not have seen if it came from somebody else. I think sometimes how that information comes to us or who shows us that information is helpful. The other thing that I would say too is sometimes when we're looking at our relationship, Dan, I heard you say, oh, yeah, you're right, I see. Right. But sometimes it's not necessarily, oh, I need to change, as much as is, oh, I need to help you see me, because clearly I'm not showing up in the world the way that I want to. So I spoke earlier about me being bold, and I say like my words come out easily, but they might not always be the softest words. And somebody who's sensitive might hear thinking that I don't love them, not knowing that this is love. This is the way I love. I'm like, it's no way I'm going to let you go out in the world like this. Like, if my friend has on something that is not flattering to her, I'm not going to be like, girl, you look good. No, I'm like, absolutely not. You are not wearing that. You are not wearing that. You are taking that off. Let's go back to your closet. We will find you something. Right now, I said, I'm joking, and this is me being silly, but I need to say that adamantly to her, so she won't think that it's okay for her to go out in this outfit. Right. Same is true in my relationship. I'm going to be steadfast, bold. Everything I say, I am sure about it, even if I'm not right. So if I am sure about it, people need to know that I will change my mind if they give me enough information. But if people don't know that, they won't go up against me, because they're like, she knows what she's talking about. Oh, well, I won't even go there. But if I tell you, I am going to be sure about everything I say, because that is who I am to my core. But if you bring me some new information and I'm like, ooh, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad you told me that. Right now, I'm sure about what you just told me. So, but I have to give people that permission to go up against me, so they know, because otherwise they think I can't go up against her because she's just so sure and so confident, and they might not be as confident as I am. So they're afraid. So you sometimes have to let people know, this is how I love. This is how bold I am with my love. And then they say, oh, I get it. That was love. Did not translate that way.
But you also, Kiné, have to be open to
Wait,
that
Dawn,
feedback.
I don't want to cut you off, Dawn, but there's somebody else who's wanting to come
Oh,
into the
yeah.
conversation. We'll make space for Walter. It looks like you had your hand
Yeah,
up.
hi. Yeah, I just want to go back to the kind of the original framing, the kind of an archetype, you know, of, as you say, the angry woman and clueless man. What is it that's so disappointing that women experience? Let's just stick with the archetype and just ask the women, what is it that's so damn disappointing over and over and over that they just never, it's something they hope for, want for, and it just doesn't seem to be there, you know? So that, let's say, not said to my face, but said from one woman to another, or to another friend, or to a man, just to hear it, you know, just to hear it without flinching.
Are you inviting that, just to be clear, are you
Yes.
inviting the women in space to
Yeah.
share that?
Inviting.
Yeah, I love that question. And I actually cannot answer it because I'm probably kind of where you are, Walter. I'm like, yeah, I'm want to know too. So, because that's not my experience. I think you are asking a really valid question. And I would love to hear where women are on that. I don't know if anybody, well, Dawn, do you feel like you can chime in on that at all?
Well, I can share my experience.
Yeah.
I can share my experience. My experience was that he was not open, that he was not willing to take responsibility for his own emotional well-being. And so it was more like he felt like he needed to compete and protect himself and not open up and be vulnerable, even though that's what I was, hoping for and offering and asking for. So it was this sense of he wasn't, even though he was taking care of me in a physical, sort of financial way, he wasn't really taking care of me and my heart. And I think a lot of women feel that way. A lot of women say, well, he paid the bills, but he wasn't present with me.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't give me his presence
Mm-hmm.
and his attention and his time and energy and effort. All of the time, energy, and effort was going elsewhere. And I was supposed to be not his world, but I was supposed to be the most important person in his world. And yet I was treated not that way. I wasn't his priority. He didn't make me feel like I was his priority.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the struggle that many women feel let down and disappointed from this man who claimed to love, honor, cherish, protect, and yet he wasn't protecting the integrity of the relationship.
Mm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I remember a story of a gentleman I was working with, and one of the things that he said was similar to that, Don. He said, I give my wife everything. I bought her the house she wants. I got her a big old ring. I gave her the car. I, gave her kids. Everything she asked for, I give her. I don't know what else she wants. And I was like, you. And he's like, what? You might have thought I said a unicorn. What? Me? He was like, I have no idea what that means. And so we talked about that, and he finally did understand what giving himself meant, because at the time in his life, he thought that giving himself meant going to work. That was where he was supposed to be, at work, so he can get the money to buy all the things. And that goes back to the striver.
And that also goes back to he's clueless. And what Dawn goes back to, basically he was clueless because his training and his programming was, yeah, I'm protecting you. I'm providing for you financially, right? Like you said, Dawn, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. What's your problem? Right? Why don't you get off my back? What's your, and you're like, I need you to connect with me. What you said was like, be vulnerable, be present, share with you. Like, again, that's the lunar navigation system that he wasn't trained in. And if he had, I guess it's a question, but it's sort of a rhetorical question. If he had that capability, if that had been awakened, trained, if he'd been raised that way, obviously grown men can have a harder time evoking this in themselves than my son, who I'm trying to raise this way with my partner. But I think that's sort of the question that Walter posed, and your answer to it kind of illustrate what we're talking about, right? Because what was missing is what I would call him having that kind of conscious sensitivity to what your needs really were, and feeling the wind of those sails, and not just going like, I have the gift, I'm following the map, and this is where you wanted to go, and you wanted to have a house. You know what I'm saying? So it looks like somebody else wants to chime in. Is that Christina?
It's my other hand.
Oh, Walter.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Really, I was really hearing you a bit. Any of the other ladies want to respond?
I'll add, and I second everything Don's experience, and to add a little bit additional to that that came up for me was around communication. I think that and this kind of takes me back to my 20s. I'm in my late 30s now, but in my 20s in relationships, and now when I see it come up at this later point in life, it's kind of like the relationship doesn't go, but I actually was able to even see it a little bit this past weekend in just a dating context, and it's around of not communicating for fear that they fear that there's something wrong with what they're feeling, or and so they suppress that and just don't speak to it. So I guess it comes to like the lack of vulnerability within that, and those examples, part of one of the things is generally around like attraction to other women, and with holding that, and then it gets like, it gets dispersed in strange ways, or these like little white lies that I guess of and I don't know how this is, but of seeing that's why a experience I had this past weekend, it was like so small, but I was with this person in a store, and the chairs in the store were listed on the price tag as $89. And then we got up to the register and they're wanting to make a deal. And she's like, oh, how many were the chairs? The price tag was $68 in the price tag. And he's like, oh yeah. Uh-huh. And I knew, I was like, he's lying. Like, he's totally lying. The chair said $89. And this is kind of embarrassing. And I just took a mental note, like, this isn't my person, but I'm, not gonna, and I just see that little small thing of saying, agreeing to the chairs being a different price, that little white lie is also just stemmed in, and maybe women do it too. But in my relationships have generally been with men, and I've experienced those like little white lies or truth withholding that then causes me to disengage.
Yeah, there's a really interesting thing operating there, and it's almost like I feel like there's a magical element to relationship that we haven't talked about yet, and it's sort of, you could call it karmic, and I think it applies to little relationships like that. And it's sort of like, and my friend David Shank, who's invited to speak at some point if he wants to, I think can't stand when I say things like this, but I feel like there's certain spiritual, magical things to the way the universe works, like how people receive their names. You ever seem like people seem to fit their names? And I always wonder, like, how does that happen? Is it some kind of thing where you are named something and then people treat you a certain way? I actually have this feeling, and this is just my little spiritual philosophy, that there's something about the incoming being that almost whispers in its parents' ears, like, call me this thing. And I guess what I'm speaking to is that there's some kind of part of us, like the receptivity of the parents, just like, oh, this kid is Bear. My son's name is Bear. That is similar in the way our attraction works. Like, we think we're attracted to, oh, this is my type. I like this kind of woman, and oh, I like this kind of man. And yet when we really are in relationship with people, whether it's just a couple of dates and you realize this guy's not honest, right? And you dump him because you realize, what I've learned about myself in this relationship is integrity is so is so important to me. And I don't want to be intimate with somebody who lies to other people, even if it's about insignificant thing, right? There was like a karmic moment for you where he actually served you in this relationship of however long it lasts by revealing this about himself. I guess what I'm saying is, and this applies to lifelong marriages as much as it does to a date gone wrong, that we think that we're in a relationship because I want to have sex with some other person, or I want to have intimacy, I want to be loved, I want to have companionship. But if we look, I think when we're on our deathbeds, I'm assuming, we look back and it's not like, oh, I was with that person because she was the prettiest and I liked the way she made me feel. That's the candy of relationships. What the relationships really are helping us evolve and grow as people. And so I sometimes think that there's this innate sense when you meet someone, you're not just like, oh, she's got a nice body, but like, her issues are going to be very helpful in pushing my buttons and making me learn stuff about myself that I'm not otherwise willing to look at. I'm only willing to look at it if this candy is given to me of this person's companionship and their whatever else, the nice stuff I'm getting in the relationship. So I that story connects with me in that way. I always go immediately to like, well, that's really off-putting, but what a wonderful gift in a way that he gave you in that moment, because you realize that's not good enough for me, right? You learn something about your standards.
Yeah. I wanted to add to what Walter was asking, that some of it is that we could improve our ask. Women, we could improve our ask, because I imagine that, Walter, you have been in a relationship and you're still asking that question. So if you've been in a relationship and women haven't made you understand what they're asking for, it's because we have to improve our ask. We have to communicate differently. And the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus is really just to say we speak different languages. We talk differently. The way you speak to a woman is different than the way you speak to a man. Now, people don't usually like to hear that, but it's true. And I study human behavior as a therapist. And so knowing that if I'm doing therapy with a man, I do it a certain way because I know how to get him to move through this therapy. If I'm doing therapy with a woman, I do it a different way. And I think if we as women can improve our ask so that men understand us, because if I go to France, I'm going to do my best to try and speak French there. I'm going to figure it out, even if I could just phrase it out. I'm going to do that. I'm not going to expect them to speak English because I'm in their country. So if a man is who I'm talking to and I'm asking for this thing, then I need to speak his language and help him understand. But conversely, men need to say, I don't understand. Can you say that differently? I do want to serve you in this way. I do want you to have your needs met, but I'm not understanding what you're asking me for. Is there another way we can? And then that's where the third party comes in. That's where the therapist comes in. A lot of times what I'm saying is, oh, well, he's saying this and she's saying this, and I'm translating for them because I speak both languages. And so maybe if we can work on improving our ask, that would be helpful, both to men and men asking, can you clarify more? Can you break that down? Can you speak my language so that I can understand you? Because what you want is important to me.
We're getting close to the end. You know, it's interesting where the diversity piece comes in for me, Kiné, because that all resonated is, let's say you walk into a room of 100 men though, right? Are they all speaking man? Or like, let's say you have to do 10 sessions with 10 different men in that room. I'm imagining that there's some men whose language in terms of their receptivity to what you're saying, how you're breaking it down for them is very different than others. And in fact, there's probably some men who are seeming to speak woman language. You know what I mean? At least this is my experience of men, that there's yes, there is there's these broader strokes of how women talk to each other and how women talk to men and stuff. But I'm intrigued about this next level stuff. You know what I mean? Like, when do we shift from group identity to individual identity? Where I'm now, and when you're in therapy with someone, you're not just speaking in the man language, but because it's a man, but you're sensing this is a man who is this particular way that has nothing to do with his gender and is this particular way. And he seems to relate through this particular thing. I imagine that there's more nuance in your process there. Am I wrong about that?
Oh, there is some nuance as you drill down, but as a hypnotherapist, thank gosh that men are the way they are and women are the way they are, because I have a framework that I can use. Children are the easiest to hypnotize. It's a lot less work, and I can do it in an hour, and they will be different. And believe that or not, men are second easiest, and women are a little harder, because women do have a lot more emotion that they need to get out in this conversation. So a hypnotherapy session with a woman needs to be a little longer, because she is going to want to have a few more words than a man is going to have. And I'm going to tailor that conversation to the man, because if I'm in a hypnotherapy session with a man, then I know I'm step by step, and that's all he wants, and we're going to move through this, and he doesn't have to give me a lot of words. He's going to go inward to give me the words in hypnotherapy. Children, the same thing. They're not going to be able to explain to me exactly how they feel. Oh, let me tell you what my mom did to me. Blah, 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 blah. No. I'm 8 years old, lady. I don't know exactly what she did. I just know I didn't like it. And so if I go into hypnotherapy with a child, I'm not asking them for a lot of words. I'm just getting down to what I know, where the trauma is. Where's the trauma? And the way that I get to the trauma is the exact same way. I'm counting down. I'm counting you in. I'm going to your subconscious brain. I'm getting your critical brain out of the way. I'm asking you to take what we work on in your subconscious brain up to your conscious brain. I'm just following a framework. And I follow that framework because it works every time. It works for children a certain way. It works for men a certain way. And it works for women a certain way. And thank goodness it does, because it makes my job easier.
That's fascinating. So we're pretty much at 8:30. Two more things. Kiné, you had kind of a special offer to make for people on the call that I wanted to give you the opportunity to drop into the chat. Or do you want to talk about that quickly? And then after we do that, just the last opportunity for anybody who hasn't gotten a chance to speak, who wants to say something. It doesn't matter if we go a couple minutes over. And of course, anyone's free to log off whenever they want to. But why don't we do that, and then just do a last little opportunity for anyone to speak, and then we'll say goodnight.
Awesome.
So,
Yeah.
Kiné?
So I do have what I call a masterclass. It's called Embracing Wealth. And as Dan mentioned in the beginning, I'm the CEO of Presidential Lifestyle, and Presidential Lifestyle is a wellness company focused on wealth in all of its forms. And so this masterclass gives you the 5 essential keys to really creating the life that you want in all areas. So that's wealth, health, adventure, love, and legacy. And in this masterclass that I'm having this Saturday, that's what we'll talk about. What is the framework? What is the formula for creating that life and that well-rounded, comprehensive, multi-layered, beautiful life that you're looking for? So I'll drop that link to register for that masterclass on Saturday inside the chat. I'll get that link now. Thank you, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Kiné. Is there anyone else, who already has spoken already and wants to add something or hasn't said anything at all? I just wanted to open the floor one more time. Maybe put up your hand, it looks like nobody's putting up their hand. So, yes. Oh, there. Boom. I think that's Seth's parents. Hello, and so glad to see you.
Ever in your Daniel, good to see you, and we appreciate. I very much appreciate what I'm hearing tonight and what you're doing. You've managed to evoke a good deal of discomfort, I suppose, as well.
That's an achievement, I think. That's a plus.
Go ahead, Vic.
No, we came because we're interested in this subject. We've been around a while.
52 years
50
of marriage, yeah.
And known each other since we were 5 years old. And all I can say is it's not the same as it was when in the beginning. I mean, it has changed. It's been like 20 different marriages, 20 different relationships. And sometimes it's this last year of COVID and other things has been a challenge, just life stages. So I want to say something, but it's too overwhelming. But this is interesting, but it impacts us too, just because we're a little older, that we get what you're talking about. So thank you.
Certainly want to come to future events here. You reminded me of a real simplistic, it's almost an engineering-based theory that I always held, and was it's something like this. It's like, I feel like relationships tend to devolve to the lowest common denominator, meaning to me that a relationship between two people can never be any better than the relationship that people have with themselves. And so you had referred earlier, Daniel, to inner work, and I'd be very interested to hear more about that, future events.
Wow, I cannot think of a better way to finish the session. I'm honored by that share. What a wonderful thing to have a couple that's lasted. Give us a little peek. And I almost wish you'd shared that thing that was too overwhelming to share. So if you change your mind in 10 seconds.
Well, there's too much. There's too many years.
Okay.
And it was fun to be here with Seth. And he's the one that got us interested. And we do a lot of spiritual classes. And believe me, we need all the help we can get, no matter how old we are.
Amen.
So.
That's beautiful, and it's humble, and I'm so thankful for all of you to come, and to have 2 generations of a family here is really special. And I'm grateful to all the people I know and those who I don't know on this. Thank you for making time for this. It's been really enriching for me, and I've learned so much from these sessions and from this session. Please do check out, WeDeepen and other programs they have. I think you'll find a lot of gold there. And yeah, come back and to another session. We just have at least, I think there's 2 more scheduled for this run, and that might be the end of it, or we might do more. But it's just, no matter how many people show up, it's always such incredibly wonderful, sensitive, articulate, intelligent people, and it really makes it really enriching for me. So thank you all, and check out Kiné's offer. Thank you, Kiné, for being such a wonderful featured guest. Thank you all for participating. You guys are fantastic. Have a great night. Thank you, Deepen, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Seth, I'm about to say goodbye, but man, it was so great that your parents showed up for this. What a wonderful thing.
Yeah, that was cool, man. You inspired a really cool conversation with my family. I think I was telling you about after the last session.